Hello everyone and welcome to a new video from Your Overwatch. I'm Eddie the Chump and today we'll be taking a look at the top 5 most common mistakes that players make while playing in solo queue competitive. Okay, so whether you're a new player or someone with a lot of experience, this list could contain some valuable information for you, as most people don't really reflect on their own game or game decisions with a critical mind. This can lead to bad habits and not being as good as one could be. So with that said, let's get started. Number 5. Playing your own game too much. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is to do with attitude and approach. I've said it before and I'm sure I'll say it again, but in Overwatch, synergy and teamwork beats carry. Well, a lot of players decide to approach the game in a very isolated way mentally. I've lost count of the amount of times I've had teammates make decisions on picks that didn't take any influence from either our team's comp or our opponents. They simply pick who they want, play for themselves, and basically play the game like it's Call of Duty. Here's an example. How many players have you had in your solo queue games who insist on playing Genji, no matter what, even against a team running triple tank? That person only wants to play Genji, even if it is demonstratively unwise for him to do so. This is common with Hanzo mains as well, hence why he has become sort of a meme on the channel. But don't think this just applies to a DPS pick. It's most common in players of that class to be sure, but it's also quite common in divas and roadhogs too. The reason for that is that solo queue doesn't always conform to meta, as there's much less teamwork and coordination going on. So people are tempted to pick characters that can self-sustain as well, regardless of whether their choice is a good one for the team. This mental framework of picking for oneself exclusively is what leads to disaster, and is one of the biggest mistakes people can make in solo queue. Number 4. Tunnel vision. Okay, so this is a trait that flawed players display regularly, and is directly related to the previous mistake on this list. When playing your own game too much, you're displaying classic tunnel vision symptoms. But tunnel vision itself can happen to players in an organized environment as well. Basically, a player's focus can narrow to the point where the thing that's happening right in front of them is the only thing that matters, be it a duel they're having, a poorly optimized ultimate executed for selfish reasons, or bad positioning because of a lack of awareness of where their team are pushing or falling away. It is actually one of the most defining characteristics of a bad player in general, although let's be fair, most players do this to some extent. You have to, in fact, in certain situations. A Winston initiating and trying to eliminate the enemy team's mercy is totally tunnel visioning on his objective. Even trading out in that context is often good. But a good Winston won't do that at the wrong time, because he's paying attention to what's going on with his team, and that's the point. Bad players are always tunnel visioning. They don't switch between the perspectives. It is hard not to do, and I'm certainly not claiming that I haven't suffered from this, but the best players do it the least often. Another good example is when players constantly trickle in one by one on offense and never group up. Number 3. Picking niche heroes too often. Okay, so this example is also interrelated with the previous two. They should do, as this is a list about mistakes. How often do you think you've seen a teammate pick either Torb or Symmetra on capture point or hybrid defense and get exactly zero value from them? The way the meta is now, that being dive heavy and fast paced, that is quite often. So let's discuss this. Symmetra is incredibly hard to get value out of currently. All it takes is one Winston to have all your best laid turrets destroyed in an instant. Attaining her ultimate in the time where it would be useful is just too difficult. Take Anubis for example. A lot of players take her on the first point of defense. The trouble is, in order for her to get the teleporter and have it be relevant, she'd have to have the enemy team repeatedly walk into her traps and charged projectile. At any decent level of play that doesn't happen, but the few times it does justifies the pick to those players from now until seemingly the end of time. There's a reason she's not meta. The same goes for Torb. His turrets and his kit just don't have the utility they once did. People have got so used to countering them with ease, but still people insist on using them. But I've saved my absolute favourite for last, and that's when a teammate picks Bastion and your team has no Rhine to protect him. This is a play that displays all the mistakes I've mentioned already, and this one combined into one tragic decision. Don't pretend like it doesn't happen. We've all seen it. At number 2, this is a big one. Thinking picking more DPS is a solution to poor focus fire. We've all had our games where it feels like the enemy team just never dies. Their synergy is on point and your team has a Junkrat and Hanzo on offense. So what do people do? They decide picking more DPS is the solution to that problem. This cannot be further from the truth in most situations. If nothing is dying, then as a team you're not prioritizing the right targets to focus down in the right order. What is most likely happening is that people are having split up individual engagements all over the map. Why does this happen? Well, it seems like all the mistakes on this list are interrelated, doesn't it? And that's because they are. Poor focus fire is a result of tunnel visioning, playing selfishly and making poor hero choices. And this mistake is about the misconception of how to fix that. Picking more DPS is no guarantee of increased fragging power and a terrible solution to the problem. Sure, maybe a few individual duels go in your favor, but most likely your team will lose every team fight. But worse than before, as as you're sacrificing either a support or a tank to do so. Good focus fire is a hallmark of people who understand the game at a competent level. They realise you can't carry individually. They also realise picking more DPS isn't what's needed to change. It's that better teamwork is needed to win a team fight. And at number 1 on my top 5 list of mistakes made in solo queue, picking carry DPS without the skill or game sense to do so. This is arguably my most despised mistake and the one that gets me personally the most heated. Let's have a conversation about DPS characters quickly. They are the most glamorous roles, the ones that people recognise as the quote-unquote star roles. As such, people gravitate towards them endlessly, and I totally understand why. McCree is my equal favourite character along with Zenyatta. I get it, I really do. But here's the problem. Most people don't know how to play the role correctly or lack the mechanics to do so. Or they do know how to play it but don't have good enough mechanics, or vice versa. Either way, a player with all the bad habits I've mentioned in this video can be found most regularly picking DPS and never changing. This really is the bane of solo queue. People selfishly picking, playing selfishly, not realising why their team is losing because, and I quote, I have gold medals, and generally playing a team fighting game as a solo carry, and badly at that. There are so many examples I can give of poorly optimised DPS play. Junkrat against a dive team with no Rein and some flankers, McCree or Hanzo with no Rein to protect them, Genji or Tracer against triple tank, Pharah against double hit scan and no mercy to pocket her. These are all examples of why it's actually really difficult to play DPS properly, and most of it has to do with what underpins this entire list, and that's a lack of game sense and the awareness to make that realisation in the first place. This, I imagine, will not be a popular idea, that actually most people play this role poorly even up to higher diamond levels. Here's a specific example that a lot of people don't even think about. If your supports are constantly being dove by a flanker or a Winston, whose job is it to turn from a poke battle and protect them? Well, ideally it's everyone's, but you know who most regularly doesn't do that? Poor DPS players. They are all too often stuck in their own individual fight somewhere, out of position and calling for heals without even realising their supports are dead. All of the mistakes on this list can tragically combine into a fatal flaw in a player's individual play. It's very difficult to deal with and can present some challenges in overcoming. I made a video once where I said you can get by with average DPS if your supports are top notch. This is still true, but by average DPS I mean average mechanically, not poor game sense DPS. One solution is going to be made into a video by Frito for the channel, and at first it might seem contradictory, but I'll just leave that there as a tease as I don't want to ruin his already excellent video. In summary, the top 5 mistakes made in solo queue have one thread running through them: game sense. If you lack the awareness to think about your game critically, or think about the bigger picture during a game, you will be limited as a player and will find progressing up the ranks difficult. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to leave a rating. If you want us to talk about anything specific, please don't hesitate to leave a comment below. I've been Eddie the Chump, and until next time.